On a misty early morning in 1860, the maid Hannah Calvik stood barefoot on a heavy metal platform, awaiting her verdict. The stern steward methodically moved the weights, recording every gram of her weight in a thick ledger. Not only did her daily ration of bread depend on this entry, but also her very right to remain in the house. Watch the video to the end, and you'll learn how a routine weighing procedure turned into the most sophisticated tool for controlling people. I discovered this system of control by chance while studying the archival household accounts of British aristocrats. It turned out that behind the facade of respectable tea parties lay a ruthless machine for accounting for the human body. Estate owners measured their workers just as meticulously as they weighed coal or flour. For many years, this secret remained buried in the pages of dusty ledgers, concealing the true cost of impeccable service. Are you ready to learn the truth about what it cost the servants to maintain perfect order? What I am about to reveal was long considered mere speculation by historians. You will see the real mechanics of life on an estate, where every cut of meat was subject to strict supervision. We will trace the story of Hannah Calvik and other women forced to sacrifice their physical dignity. This is the hidden truth that the owners of these luxurious homes preferred to keep confined to their basements. A secret passed down from generation to generation will finally be revealed in the finest detail. In 1861, Isabella Beeton published her famous book on household management. This weighty volume became a veritable Bible for the middle and upper classes of the British Empire. Beeton openly compared running a household to commanding a military garrison. Within this structure, servants were viewed as soldiers obliged to obey a strict regimen without question. The physical condition of a worker immediately became a subject of close scrutiny by employers. Isabella Beeton recommended that housewives personally inspect their staff, assessing their strength and stamina. A healthy servant was considered a sound investment, whereas a weak one brought only losses. Homeowners began to view their subordinates' bodies as part of the household inventory. This approach stripped people of their individuality, turning them into machines for performing tasks. A distinct culture of suspicion took root in the vast mansions of Victorian England. Householders constantly feared that their servants were consuming too many expensive foods. Meat, sugar, and tea were costly, and their consumption had to be strictly controlled. Stewards locked the pantries with heavy locks, dispensing provisions strictly by the gram. But even such measures could not fully reassure the owners of these luxurious estates. It was at this point that the concept of regularly measuring physical parameters came into play. The landowners decided that a person's weight was the ideal indicator of their eating habits. If a maid began to gain weight rapidly, it was considered direct evidence of food theft. On the other hand, sudden weight loss indicated illness and an inability to perform work. Thus, scales became the primary tool for assessing an employee's loyalty. Arthur Manby left detailed diary entries about the lives of the working class. He was literally obsessed with the physical characteristics of women engaged in hard labor. In his notes, Manby meticulously recorded the height, shoulder width, and hand size of the female workers. This interest reflected a general tendency among the upper class to view the bodies of their subordinates as objects. For Manby, a maid's physical strength was a sign of her class status. The household ledgers of large estates gradually turned into veritable medical records. Alongside entries for candle expenses, columns appeared listing the names of workers and their physical measurements. The owners hired special stewards whose duties included regularly filling out these tables. Every Sunday after attending church, the staff would line up at the back entrance. The data recording procedure took place in absolute silence, underscoring the seriousness of the occasion. This accounting system was introduced gradually, starting with the wealthiest aristocratic households. The dukes set the trend for household management, which the middle class quickly adopted. Having scales in the kitchen came to be seen as a sign of a rational approach to managing one's affairs. Manufacturers of measuring instruments began producing special models for home use. Heavy cast iron scales with copper weights became an integral part of utility rooms. Householders, for their part, viewed their actions as a manifestation of concern for the moral well-being of their subordinates. In Victorian morality, gluttony was considered a serious sin leading to laziness. By restricting access to food, the aristocracy believed they were saving the souls of their workers. This ideology allowed them to justify incredible cruelty with good intentions. Rational calculation was closely intertwined with the religious dogmas of the era. As a result, a servant's body ceased to belong to him and became the property of his employer. Every muscle and every fold of fat was subject to evaluation, measurement, and control. This system transformed a simple home into something resembling a high-security institution. I'd be very interested to hear your perspective on such methods of staff training. Please share your thoughts on this approach to managing people in the 19th century in the comments. Eaton Hall, rebuilt by Richard Grosvenor, represented the pinnacle of architectural class segregation. The second Marquess of Westminster ordered the house to be designed so that the masters and servants would never cross paths. A vast network of underground corridors allowed the staff to move between the wings of the building unnoticed. This invisibility was a key requirement for what the high aristocracy considered ideal service. The staff's lives unfolded in the artificial twilight of the basement levels and long passageways. The space was organized to make the most efficient use of every step a servant took. Pantries, kitchens, and laundry rooms were arranged in a strict sequence reminiscent of a factory assembly line. It was in these utilitarian rooms that the staff's physical condition was monitored. Scales were placed at the busiest thoroughfare so that no one could avoid the procedure. The weighing process was integrated into the daily routine of a vast country estate. The estate manager had a special office whose windows overlooked the service entrance. From this office, he could observe the movements of every member of the large staff. On certain days of the week, the door to the office would open and a weighing scale would be set up on the threshold. The workers would approach the platform one by one, obediently waiting for their measurements to be recorded. For Richard Grosvenor, order in the house was a reflection of his status and authority. He required his managers to submit weekly reports on the state of the household. In these reports, the staff's weight was considered just as important as flour consumption. If the figures deviated from the norm, the manager was required to conduct an immediate investigation. Any change in physical appearance was viewed as a potential threat to the ideal order. The division of space into the master's quarters and the servants' quarters had deep symbolic meaning. The upper floors symbolized the intellect, culture, and spiritual development of aristocratic society. The lower floors were associated with physiology, menial labor, and animalistic needs. Weighing in the basement underscored the servants' status as beings of a purely physical nature. Their bodies were tethered to the earth and measured in material terms. This architectural and social divide seemed absolutely unshakable at the time. People were born and died without ever stepping outside the narrow social corridors assigned to them. The stark numbers in the administrator's ledgers securely anchored each person to their place. Are you ready to learn exactly how the cold numbers from these underground corridors shaped the fate of one particular woman? In the next chapter, you'll see how this system worked through the example of a real historical figure. What was found in the old archives forever changed our understanding of Victorian maids. In the 1950s, historians discovered the personal diaries of Hannah Calvik, a simple maid. These entries provided a unique window into the world of grueling manual labor in the 19th century. Hannah described her days in detail, which consisted of sweeping fireplaces and mopping floors. She worked 16 hours a day, earning mere pennies for her labor. Her life became intertwined with that of Arthur Manby, who became her secret husband and chief overseer. Manby came from high society and kept his relationship with a simple factory worker a secret. He demanded regular reports from Hannah on her physical condition and the work she had completed. His diaries contained detailed records of how her weight and muscle mass changed. Arthur forced her to weigh herself to ensure she maintained her working status. For Manby, Hannah's physical strength was a source of strange aesthetic pleasure. He made her pose for photographs in her work clothes, smeared with coal and soot. In these photos, the emphasis was always on her strong arms and broad shoulders. The weighing procedure became part of this ritual of objectifying the female body. The numbers on the scale served as confirmation to him that she remained a true laborer. Hannah herself viewed her hard labor as a form of spiritual service. She took pride in her endurance and her ability to do men's work. Her diaries often contain entries about how many buckets of coal she carried in a day. However, Arthur's constant monitoring put her under intense psychological pressure. She was afraid of losing her physical fitness, lest she disappoint her secret master. Hannah Calvik was forced to lead a double life for many decades. During the day, she worked as a maid in the homes of respectable bourgeois families, obeying their rules for keeping track of provisions. In the evening, she returned to Manby, who subjected her to his own inspection and weighing. Her body was a battleground between her employer's frugality and the strange demands of her secret husband. In both cases, she remained merely an object for mathematical measurements. Her writings reveal a constant weariness from this unending evaluation. She describes moments when she was too exhausted to even stand on her own 2 feet, but she forced herself to get up and go to the weigh-in to avoid reproach. The metal platform of the scale became for her a symbol of her endless debt to society and her husband. Her fate became a reflection of millions of other lives left out of the historical narrative. Hannah's diaries prove that weight control was not merely an economic necessity. It became a tool of absolute psychological domination over the individual. The numbers were used to make a person feel inferior and dependent. The masters controlled not only their servants' time, but also their physical bodies. This form of control penetrated the most intimate spheres of human existence. This leads us to reflect on how the economy influences perceptions of the human body. In the next chapter, we will see how this data was transformed into rigorous financial reports. In the mid-19th century, what did the most secret documents of Victorian estate managers conceal? The household ledgers of large estates were masterpieces of bureaucratic art. They recorded, with incredible precision, every penny spent on the household. The pages were divided into numerous columns for tracking coal, candles, soap, and food. But the most interesting data was hidden in the sections devoted to the service staff. The estate manager at Trentham Hall developed a complex system of color-coding entries. He used red ink to mark servants whose weight exceeded the standards set for their positions. Those workers who fell within the ideal weight range were recorded in black ink. This visual system allowed the master to assess the condition of his living property at a glance. The ledger had become a ruthless tool of social segregation.
Hold your breath, girl.
The cost of maintaining each servant was calculated down to the smallest fraction of a penny. Stewards calculated the relationship between a worker's weight and the amount of food they consumed. It was believed that an overweight cook cost the estate's budget significantly more than a thin maid. Therefore, when hiring new staff, preference was often given to people with a slender build. They were cheaper to feed, even if they performed the same heavy work. The weekly audit procedure included comparing food supplies with the weight of the staff. If the pantry was emptying faster than usual, the manager would immediately consult the weighing records. Upon identifying a worker who had gained weight, he would designate that person as the prime suspect in the embezzlement. No excuses were accepted, as the figures in the ledger were considered irrefutable proof. The logic of the system ruled out any individual variations in human metabolism. The estate owners regularly conducted inspections of their stewards and house managers' work. They would descend to the basements to personally review the thick notebooks containing the measurement results. During such visits, the servants were required to line up along the cold stone walls of the corridor. The aristocrats compared the real people with their mathematical counterparts on the pages of the books. This process resembled taking inventory of furniture or counting the silverware in the sideboard. In some households, separate weight fluctuation charts were kept for each employee. These curved lines clearly illustrated periods of holidays and busy work seasons. Managers analyzed this data in an effort to optimize food costs for the servants. They cut back on rations during months when the charts showed a widespread increase in body weight. These savings were achieved at the expense of the well-being of those at the very bottom of the hierarchy. In the event of dismissal, an excerpt from this book was often attached to a letter of recommendation. Employers exchanged information about servants' physical measurements, creating a sort of blacklist. A person prone to being overweight might spend years looking for work because of their tarnished reputation. This body accounting extended beyond the boundaries of a single estate, encompassing the entire country. The system left no chance for those who did not conform to the standards of Victorian thrift. The books themselves were carefully preserved in family archives for many generations. Today, they serve as a vital source of information for historians and sociologists. By studying these yellowed pages, we can reconstruct a picture of the harsh exploitation of the past. Behind the neat rows of numbers lie the shattered lives of real people from the era of the Industrial Revolution. These documents are silent witnesses to how capital turned human beings into commodities. The accounting of the human body reached its absolute peak during this period. The rationalization of daily life resulted in a complete disregard for the basic needs of service personnel. The numbers on paper proved more important than the living emotions, fatigue, and pain of ordinary workers. What would happen if no one ever learned of these workers' true feelings? The ritual of weekly weigh-ins was designed to suppress human will as much as possible. The procedure itself took place in silence, interrupted only by the clinking of metal weights on the scale. The worker had to stand completely still, with his eyes cast down at the floor. Any display of emotion, whether a smile or a sigh, was severely punished with fines. The managers deliberately used this process to demonstrate their absolute power. They forced the servants to remove their shoes and outer clothing while standing on the cold stone floor. This physical discomfort intensified the feeling of vulnerability and complete defenselessness in the presence of their superiors. The procedure was often drawn out. The steward might take his time moving the weights, savoring the moment. Waiting for the verdict turned into a veritable psychological torture for the exhausted people. Hannah Calvik described in her diary a deep sense of shame during such inspections. She understood that she was being evaluated solely as a tool of labor, not as a person. This shame was a universal experience for most Victorian maids and footmen. The constant reminder of their physical imperfections fostered insecurities and fears in them. The system deliberately undermined their self-esteem, making them more submissive. To heighten the effect, the results of the weigh-ins were often announced publicly before the entire staff. During Sunday dinner, the housekeeper would read aloud a list of those who had gained or lost weight. The names of those who had failed to meet the standards were spoken with contempt, accompanied by hurtful comments. This public procedure united the staff in fear, but destroyed trust among them. No one wanted to be in the position of having their name called out in the silence of the dining hall. The division between good and bad servants gave rise to deep internal conflicts. Those whose weight remained stable received small privileges and approving glances. Offenders, on the other hand, were ostracized not only by their superiors, but also by their colleagues. The workers began to spy on one another, reporting others' eating habits to the manager. In this way, the employers maintained perfect discipline through the very hands of their servants. Dr. Shirley Forster Murphy, who inspected the living conditions of London's workers, noted their despondent state. He attributed this apathy to constant psychological pressure from employers. The relentless monitoring drained people of their last reserves of mental strength after a grueling shift. People became withdrawn, suspicious, and deeply unhappy in their daily routine. Their emotional lives withered under the yoke of endless inspections and measurements. In his notes, Arthur Manby often noted the submissiveness and meekness of the female workers he encountered. He mistakenly took this to be a natural trait of theirs, failing to understand the true causes. This submissiveness was the result of long and systematic conditioning through humiliation. The system broke their spirits, leaving only an empty shell capable of following orders. Individuality was completely erased under the pressure of the metal weights on the platform. The awareness of their own insignificance permeated every thought of anyone caught up in this system. The servants began to believe that their only value lay in the correct numbers on paper. They lost the ability to dream of a better life or to plan for their future. Their planning horizon narrowed to the next Sunday weigh-in in the cold basement. The psychological trap snapped shut, robbing them of any hope for change. The weighing ritual became the perfect tool for maintaining class divisions in society. It served as a daily reminder to the servants of their place at the very bottom of the social hierarchy. The upper class ensured its own comfort by destroying the mental well-being of millions of ordinary people. What took place in the shadows of the luxurious halls will shock you to the core. When the needle on the kitchen scale deviated from the norm, the punishment mechanism was triggered immediately. Weight gain was considered the gravest offense, indicative of laziness and gluttony. Such a worker was immediately reassigned to the hardest and dirtiest work on the estate. He was tasked with cleaning enormous chimneys, scrubbing endless staircases, or polishing cast-iron stoves. The offender's rations were cut back to the absolute physiological minimum. Even the rare portions of meat or cheese allotted to the staff were excluded from his menu. For several weeks, the servant might subsist solely on liquid oatmeal and water. The steward strictly ensured that none of his colleagues shared food with the punished servant. This artificially induced starvation was intended to quickly restore his weight to its previous level. Weight loss, on the other hand, was regarded as a sign of impending professional unfitness. The owners of Victorian estates were terrified that a frail servant would be unable to perform their duties. Therefore, an emaciated worker could simply be thrown out onto the street without severance pay. Dismissal due to poor health was practically a death sentence for an ordinary person. Finding a new job with such a reputation was an incredibly difficult task. Arthur Manby's diaries document the fates of women dismissed for losing their physical fitness. They were forced to leave their comfortable homes and go to harsh workhouses. In these institutions, living conditions were even harsher, and the labor even more exhausting. The fear of ending up there forced many maids to hide their fatigue until the very last moment. They worked to the limit of their strength just to avoid showing any weakness at the weekly weigh-in. In her recommendations, Isabella Beeton supported this harsh system of discipline. She believed that only the fear of punishment could keep servants within the bounds of propriety. In her view, leniency led to laxity and the breakdown of domestic order. Mistresses blindly followed this advice, turning into ruthless overseers of their employees. Humanity took a back seat to the need to enforce the rules. For Hannah Calvik, keeping her job was a matter of basic survival. She knew that Manby would not support her if she lost her position as a maid. Therefore, she carefully controlled her diet, teetering on the brink of exhaustion. Her life had turned into a constant struggle against her own body and its natural needs. Every extra piece of bread could cost her her job and her patronage. At the Marquis de Batter's estate, there were particularly strict rules regarding the staff's appearance. The footmen's liveries were tailored precisely to their figures, and any change in weight made the clothes too tight. Altering an expensive uniform because a servant had gained weight was considered an unacceptable waste. In such cases, the footman was immediately dismissed and replaced with someone of the appropriate build. The aesthetics of a lavish reception took precedence over the fate of a long-serving, loyal employee. This system of punishment created an atmosphere of constant suspicion and quiet informant activity. Servants tried to frame their rivals by planting food on them or accusing them of theft. In the basements of enormous mansions, real dramas and quiet tragedies unfolded. People lost their jobs and their hope because of the fluctuations of the pointer on the cast-iron scales. The metal platform decided their fates with cold, mathematical impartiality. The price of deviating from the norm was too high for anyone to dare to rebel openly. The control system worked flawlessly, relying on the primal fear of hunger and poverty. And in a minute, you'll learn how they coped with this relentless psychological pressure. The secret, passed down from generation to generation, lies in the ability to circumvent the rules. Despite total control, Victorian servants found ways to resist the system. They developed a whole arsenal of tricks to outwit the ruthless mechanisms of the scales. The simplest method was to use heavy stones or weights in their clothing pockets. Workers who were losing weight would hide this weight before being weighed to simulate a stable body weight. Maids, fearing dismissal due to weight gain, resorted to more sophisticated tricks. A few days before a check, they would begin wearing tight corsets under their work clothes. This visually concealed their fullness, deceiving the watchful eye of the steward or the lady of the house. Just before the weighing, they would try to drink special herbal concoctions that had a powerful effect. This allowed them to temporarily bring their weight down to an acceptable level for a short time. In the kitchens of vast estates, such as Eaton Hall, a secret system of mutual aid among the staff flourished. The cooks deliberately prepared meals in such a way as to conceal some of the ingredients from the steward's records. The surplus was secretly passed on to those servants whose weight had dropped critically due to hard labor. This underground system of food distribution helped save colleagues from inevitable dismissal. People banded together in the face of a common threat, risking their own positions for the sake of others. Hannah Calvik also used small tricks in her interactions with Arthur Manby. She learned to tense certain muscle groups during measurements to appear stronger. Sometimes she deliberately wore heavier boots if she felt she had lost weight. These tiny victories over the supervisor gave her a sense of illusory freedom. Her diaries reveal a sense of pride in her ability to outwit an educated gentleman. Knowledge of how the measuring devices themselves worked also became a powerful weapon in the hands of the servants. Experienced workers knew how to discreetly adjust the calibration screw on the platform. A slight movement of the foot was enough to throw off the calibration by a few pounds. If the housekeeper didn't notice the trick, the entire staff could pass the weekly inspection without a hitch. This required tremendous dexterity and composure, as exposure was punishable by immediate dismissal. Estate owners were aware of these tricks and constantly refined their methods of control. They purchased more accurate instruments and introduced the practice of surprise inspections in the middle of the week. The race between the controllers and the controlled never ceased for a single day. This silent war wore both sides down, turning life into an endless series of suspicions. But even for the Victorian aristocracy, it proved impossible to completely subjugate human nature. The resourcefulness and mutual aid of ordinary people proved stronger than Isabella Beeton's cold calculations. They demonstrated that even under the most unbearable conditions, people find a way to protect themselves. In the next chapter, we will examine how the medicine of that era attempted to justify this harsh order. The Victorian era was a time of rapid scientific advancement and the proliferation of pseudo-scientific theories. The owners of vast estates sought a rational justification for their cruel system of control over their servants. They turned to the authority of doctors to legitimize the practice of weekly weigh-ins. The medical community of the time readily provided them with the necessary theoretical justifications for these actions. Dr. Shirley Forster Murphy published reports on the sanitary conditions of working-class housing. In his writings, he often linked excess weight to physical and moral degradation. Popular medical journals claimed that obesity among the lower classes was a sign of moral depravity. Doctors wrote in all seriousness that moderation in eating prevented the development of criminal tendencies. This ideology aligned perfectly with the economic interests of the owners of country estates. Managers began using medical terminology to justify their actions. Now, they were not simply rationing food, but caring for the health of the staff entrusted to them. Scales, once merely an accounting tool, were transformed into a diagnostic instrument of preventive medicine. Entries in the ledgers came to be viewed as medical records that needed to be closely monitored. Brutal exploitation was given the noble facade of concern for the well-being of the British nation. For Hannah Calvik, this medical discourse resulted in additional suffering. Arthur Manby, being an educated man, took an active interest in new trends in science. He forced her to follow fad diets designed specifically to keep manual laborers in good physical condition. These diets often defied common sense and did not compensate for the enormous energy expenditure. Hannah was forced to comply, as the gentleman's authority was backed by the authority of science. Doctors frequently visited large estates to conduct mass medical examinations of the service staff. They measured pulses, examined throats, and of course, reviewed the results of weekly weigh-ins. If a doctor found any deviations from the norm, he might prescribe bloodletting or strict fasting. These dubious medical procedures only worsened the condition of people already exhausted by hard labor. Science became yet another tool of oppression in the hands of the ruling class. According to popular theories, the ideal servant was supposed to have a lean and sinewy build. Body fat was considered a sign of mental sluggishness and an inability to carry out orders quickly. As a result, the amount of fats and carbohydrates in the staff's diet was artificially reduced in favor of inexpensive greens. This diet led to widespread vitamin deficiencies and chronic fatigue among the kitchen workers, but the doctors saw this merely as a successful application of their cutting-edge scientific theories. Isabella Beeton actively cited medical treatises in her books on housekeeping. She advised housewives to consult a doctor regularly regarding the menu for their servants. This created the illusion of a scientific approach to management, even in small urban households. Every housewife felt like a progressive researcher monitoring the weight of her sole maid. Medical authority relieved employers of any moral responsibility for cruelty. This pseudo-scientific foundation allowed the system of control to persist for so long. Any resistance from servants was now viewed not as a struggle for rights, but as medical ignorance. A rebellious worker was declared not only lazy, but also a danger to their own health. The system became completely airtight and impervious to any external criticism. The iron weights of the scales acquired the status of infallible scientific instruments for measuring human worth. It was not until the end of the century that a few researchers began to question the validity of such approaches. Genuine scientists drew attention to the catastrophic state of health among the working class. It became evident that chronic malnutrition and stress were causing enormous damage to the country's economy. However, changing public consciousness required time and large-scale social reforms. The metal weighing platform continued to dominate the basements of British palaces. Pseudo-medical theories only reinforced the powerless position of those who served the elite. Science became a compliant tool in the hands of those who sought to preserve the old order. In the next chapter, you'll learn how historical processes began to dismantle this closed and cruel world. What happens in the shadows inevitably comes to light eventually. At the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries, the familiar world of the British aristocracy began to change rapidly. The Industrial Revolution created new jobs in factories and plants across the country. Young people from the villages no longer sought to enter the service of estate owners. Factory work, despite all its hardships, offered greater personal freedom and independence. The owners of estates such as Eaton Hall faced an unprecedented labor shortage. The old system of strict control and weekly weigh-ins began to deter potential workers. To attract staff, the owners were forced to relax the rules and improve living conditions. Metal scales began to gradually disappear from the hallways and offices of the managers of these vast estates. The harsh mathematics of the flesh gave way to new labor market laws and social changes. The emergence of labor unions shifted the balance of power between employers and service staff. Workers began to openly demand better rations, standard working hours, and respectful treatment. Public weigh-ins came to be seen as a humiliating relic of the dark Middle Ages, rather than the norm. House managers could no longer fine footmen with impunity for being a few extra pounds overweight. Record books gradually lost their function as instruments of repression. Technological advances also contributed to the decline of old forms of strict control. The advent of electricity, running water, and central heating significantly eased the workload of maids and footmen. There was no longer a need to maintain a huge staff of people possessing exceptional physical endurance and strength. The rationalization of daily life took the path of process automation rather than the exploitation of human muscle power. Scales were needed only for weighing ingredients according to recipes. Hannah Calvik's fate also reflected these global historical shifts. Toward the end of her life, her relationship with Arthur Manby underwent significant changes due to her age. She could no longer perform heavy labor, and her physical abilities inevitably declined. Manby had to come to terms with the fact that time cannot be controlled or constantly measured. Their strange union ended in a quiet old age, in which scales no longer played a central role. World War I dealt the final blow to the culture of vast country estates. Many aristocrats lost their fortunes, and former servants went off to the front or to munitions factories. After the war, maintaining a staff of dozens of people became economically unviable and simply impossible. Lavish palaces closed, were turned into museums, or were transferred to government agencies. The vast kitchens lay empty, leaving behind only cold stone floors and rusting machinery. Ledgers recording weights were moved from the steward's offices to dusty library archives. They became historical artifacts, bearing witness to the strange and cruel customs of a bygone era. Historians studying these pages are struck by the extent to which human life was bureaucratized at that time. Rows of numbers that once determined people's fates have now become nothing more than dry statistics of the past. This system collapsed along with the social order that gave rise to it. The twilight of the era of control brought liberation to millions of ordinary people in the British Empire. They gained the right to control their own bodies without having to worry about the needle on the scale in the basement. The fear of being fired due to weight fluctuations vanished forever into the mists of history. But the psychological scars left by this system took a very long time to heal in society. Memories of those times were passed down in working-class families as grim legends. The Victorian architecture of segregation crumbled under the weight of time and progress. The metal weights proved powerless to stop the march of history and people's quest for freedom. The hidden code that changes everything is now open to our full understanding. The history of control over the bodies of Victorian servants is a story about the limits of human power. We have traced this process from Isabella Beeton's ideological principles to the underground corridors of Eaton Hall. We have seen how the estate's rational economy evolved into an instrument of total psychological suppression of the individual. This system demanded absolute obedience, reducing people to measurable mathematical quantities. The final stop on Hannah Calvik's journey turned out to be quiet, but deeply symbolic. She outlived her secret husband, Arthur Manby, and continued to live alone. Her strong hands, which had so fascinated and frightened her contemporaries, were now covered with the wrinkles of old age. Toward the end of her life, she was no longer at the mercy of the numbers in other people's notebooks. She found peace in which her body belonged solely to herself, without any conditions. Her diaries, preserved for posterity, became the most important monument to a bygone era. They shattered the beautiful myth of kind masters and happy servants in luxurious palaces. Hannah was able to bring to us the voices of those who were silenced during their lifetimes. Through her writings, we heard the clatter of scales and felt the chill of stone cellars. Her personal story has become a universal symbol of the resilience of the common person in the face of oppression. Today, old scales are sometimes displayed in museums of everyday life as amusing antique objects. Visitors examine the massive platforms, unaware of their true historical purpose. Studying these archival materials compels us to take a fresh look at 19th century social history. We come to understand that economic prosperity was built not only on looms and steam engines. It was based on strict accounting and control of every movement of millions of ordinary workers. Rationalization reached its limit when it attempted to turn a human being into a predictable and measurable mechanism. This historical experience serves as a stark warning to future generations of managers. The path from absolute subjugation to personal freedom was long and incredibly difficult. The servants of the Victorian era paved this path through quiet sabotage. perseverance, and mutual aid. Their invisible struggle in dark corridors paved the way for the sweeping social reforms of the 20th century. They proved that even the most sophisticated system of oppression fails in the face of human will. Their experience became the foundation for the development of modern labor rights and freedoms. The story of Arthur Manby and Hannah Calvik will go down in history as an example of the most complex social relationships. It intertwines class prejudices, economic dependence, and a distorted understanding of caring for one's neighbour. This union reflected all the contradictions and ills of Victorian society in miniature. By studying their lives, we gain a better understanding of the psychology of people of that time, their fears, and their motives. This is not merely a biography, but a key to deciphering an entire historical era. Today, as we assess the achievements of progress, it is important to remember its true cost. The comfort of some should not come at the expense of the humiliation and total control of others. This idea seems obvious to us now, but it took decades of struggle to establish it. The metal scales found in the cellars of British estates serve as a reminder of how easily the line can be crossed. This is a lesson about the value of human freedom and the right of every person to have control over their own body. Our story has come to an end, revealing one of the darkest secrets of the 19th century. We have travelled this path from the first pages of the diary to the twilight of the era of grand mansions. Humanity ultimately triumphed over the cold mathematics of the managers and stewards. The estate owners are now a thing of the past, leaving us only with instructive archival records. The story of Hannah Calvik will forever remain a symbol of this quiet but incredibly important victory. We have seen how a simple accounting procedure turned into a mechanism of total enslavement of the individual. The fate of Hannah Calvik and thousands of other servants has shown where such control ultimately leads. In the end, society rejected this system, restoring people's right to freedom. What lessons do you think we can learn from this dark chapter in history today? Suggest topics for future videos you'd like to see in the comments, and be sure to subscribe to our channel.